Wyoming Territory, May 1879. The wind howled low across the plain as the noonday train hissed to a stop outside the raw-edged depot of Sweetwater Junction. Rust-colored dust swirled around the boots of Randolph Elwood as he swung down from his gelding, boots thudding on the dry earth. He had come for horseshoes and a new bridle, nothing else. But fate had other plans. He heard the clank before he saw her. Metal on metal, sharp and wrong against the normal station sounds. Randolph turned his head, squinting past the train smoke and the shifting bodies of passengers. That was when he saw her chained to a splintered post beside the tracks. Like a criminal. She was young, maybe 20. Her hands were bound in iron cuffs, ankles too. Her dark blue dress was torn at the hem, dust-streaked. Her face was flushed with heat and shame, but her back was straight, chin lifted. She had hair the color of chestnuts and eyes that held defiance and fear in equal parts. "What in God's name?" Randolph muttered, striding toward her before he could stop himself. A man in a brown suit stepped between them. "Keep moving, sir. She's property of Mr. Thorne of Laramie. Mail order bride, contract paid in full." She tried to run. Randolph stopped cold. "You chained her here? She's his now. She'll learn obedience." The man smiled like he was proud. The girl's voice cracked, raw and southern. "I never agreed to be bought. I wrote letters, not a blood oath." Randolph looked straight into her eyes. "What's your name?" Her lip trembled, but she held his gaze. "Clementine Nash. From Georgia." That was all it took. Randolph had seen enough ugliness in the world, cowards in uniforms. Men who took without conscience. Women discarded like cattle. But this was evil in broad daylight. Randolph turned back to the suited man. "Unlock her." "She's not yours, sir." Randolph moved fast. He drew his Colt, cocked it once, and pointed it steady. "No. But she sure as hell ain't yours either." The man paled. "You'll hang for this." Randolph's voice was calm. "Not today." The key hit the dirt. Clementine flinched as Randolph knelt and unlocked her cuffs. His hands gentle. Her wrists were rubbed red raw. He looked up at her, his voice soft now. "You all right?" Her voice wavered. "I do not know." He stood, pocketed the key, and took her hand in his. "You will be." They walked away from the station together. No one stopped them. Randolph's horse, Buck, whinnied and stomped. Randolph helped her up into the saddle like she was made of glass. She trembled once, then set her jaw tight. They rode out of town, past the cottonwoods and the creek that wound through the valley, until the train whistle faded behind them. Half an hour later, they reached Randolph's cabin tucked against the hills. It was small, square, and clean, with a porch and a well and not much else. He helped her down, but she stood on her own, hands fisted at her sides. "I do not expect charity," she said. Randolph met her eyes. "You are not getting any." Something shifted in her face then. Not trust, not yet, but something like it. Inside, he lit the stove while she folded her hands neatly in her lap. She did not ask questions. Neither did he. After a while, she broke the silence. "I thought I was going to die there, or worse." "You are not," he said. "Not while I am breathing." She looked down at her raw wrists. "Why did you help me?" Randolph's voice was low. "Because no one else did." She blinked fast, then nodded once like that answer meant something. He poured her water and handed her a tin plate of beans. She ate slow, quiet, every movement careful. "You from Georgia?" he asked. "Yes. My father died during the war. Mama after. I answered an ad in the paper because I had nothing left." Her voice turned brittle. "I did not think it would end with chains." "It will not," Randolph said. "Not anymore." She looked at him for a long time. What kind of man frees a stranger like that? He shrugged. The kind that cannot sleep knowing she is still out there. A long silence passed between them. Then her voice, soft. I never even saw his face. The man who paid for me. Only letters. I thought he was kind. Randolph's jaw clenched. You deserved better. She nodded, voice barely a whisper. I wanted a home. Randolph stood. Then let us make one. Her eyes lifted to his, startled. He stepped closer, slow and sure. Marry me, today. Not because I rescued you, not because you owe me, but because I want to be the man who gives you peace. Tears filled her eyes. You do not even know me. I know enough, and I will learn the rest every day until I take my last breath. She reached out then, her hand brushing his arm. Her fingers were trembling. I want that, she whispered. I want to choose this. Choose you. Randolph smiled for the first time. Then we will ride to the preacher's before the sun comes up. She let out a shaky breath, the first smile ghosting across her lips. He built a fire to keep her warm. She leaned against the wall, eyes fluttering closed, safe for the first time in years. And outside, the moon rose high. Dawn waited just beyond the hills. The preacher's cabin lay 5 miles east, tucked against a rise of aspen and pine where the ground turned soft with spring melt. Randolph rode slow, Clementine in front of him, her back pressed lightly to his chest. The sky had begun to pale, not yet dawn, but the stars were fading in the east. She held the reins with both hands, though he guided the horse with his knees, not needing to speak. She didn't say much, but her shoulders had eased some. He could sense it in the way she sat now upright but no longer braced tight like a trapped animal. Her hair, loose from its pins, stirred against his chin. He didn't look down, just kept his eyes on the road and the treeline beyond where the preacher lived with his wife and daughter. Clementine's voice came quiet through the wind. Do you know the preacher well? Well enough, Randolph said. He married my sister and her man. Buried my father 2 winters back. Did you love him? Your father. His jaw worked once before he answered. Not much, but I reckon I mourned what he never was. She nodded, then looked down at her hands. You have a sister? Rosalind. Lives up near Fort Washakie now. Married to a trader. She always had more sense than me. Clementine gave a soft exhale like surprise. I'd pictured you alone in the world. I was mostly, till this morning. She turned slightly, just enough to glance at him over her shoulder. That's a mighty full thing to say after one night. Randolph's gaze didn't leave the road. It's not the time that matters. It's how you fill it. Clementine looked away again, but he felt her hand shift just slightly on the reins, brushing his. She didn't move it. When they reached the preacher's cabin, the porch lantern was already lit. The door opened before Randolph dismounted. Reverend Mallory stepped out, gray-haired and thin, his wool coat hanging off narrow shoulders. His wife, Miriam, stood behind him with a shawl drawn tight around her arms. You come early, the Reverend said, squinting at Clementine with soft curiosity. And with company. Randolph helped her down. This is Clementine Nash. We aim to marry. Mallory looked between them, then nodded once, no questions. Come inside. Miriam'll put coffee on. Inside, the warmth from the stove cut the morning chill. Miriam guided Clementine gently to a chair near the hearth. She didn't touch her wrists or ask about the bruising, just poured hot water into a basin and brought out a clean cloth. Randolph stood near the window, watching the first light reach the hills. Clementine's voice reached him, soft but steady. I never imagined this. Not like this. He turned. Do you want to wait? Her eyes met his, clear and sure. No. I want to begin. The ceremony was short. The Reverend's voice was low and certain, his words falling like stones in a still pond. Clementine's hand never left Randolph's. When it came time for vows, she spoke without hesitation. I choose this man not for what he's done, but for what I see in him. I give myself freely, and I ask nothing but honesty. Randolph answered just as plain. I will keep you safe, and I will never let you carry more than your share. The rings were borrowed thin bands from the Reverend's drawer, meant for hands smaller than Randolph's, but they fit well enough. Afterward, Miriam pressed a handkerchief into Clementine's palm and squeezed her fingers gently. You'll find your footing, she said. It takes time, but it comes. They rode back the long way, through the cottonwood grove where deer tracks marked the soft dirt. Clementine sat easier now. She leaned into him, head resting just below his collarbone, and he let his arms settle around her waist. Do you mind that I ain't got anything to bring you? She asked, voice low. Randolph tightened his hold. You brought yourself. That's more than I hoped for. They reached the cabin just as the sun broke over the ridge. Light spilled across the porch, catching the glass panes and the worn boards like a promise. Inside, he stoked the fire while she unpinned her hair fully and brushed it out with a comb she found in a drawer. She didn't ask if it was his sister's or someone else's. Didn't seem to matter. He handed her a cup of hot water with a pinch of dried mint from a tin. She sipped it slow, watching him from beneath long lashes. I'd like to plant something, she said. Once the frost clears. Maybe beans. Or sage. Randolph nodded. We'll clear a patch near the well. Get you seed from the store in Lander. She looked around the little cabin, her gaze catching on the shelf by the window, the wool blanket folded neat at the foot of the bed, the tin plates hung on nails. I can make this into something, she said softly. Randolph stepped closer, resting his hand lightly at her back. You already have. She didn't cry, just stood there beside him, eyes full of quiet wonder. Outside, the wind had settled. The land stretched wide and still, waiting for what came next. The third morning broke warm and quiet. Clementine stood at the threshold of the cabin, arms folded around herself, watching two crows circle over the cottonwoods. Randolph had gone down to the creek with the axe slung over his shoulder, and the sound of wood splitting echoed faintly over the rise. She hadn't asked him to leave the door open, but he had anyway. Inside, she turned her attention to the hearth. The fire had burned low overnight, but there were still coals enough to coax a flame. She crouched before it, arranging kindling with measured care. Her fingers no longer trembled. She found flour and salt and the last of the lard tucked behind a tin of dried yarrow. The biscuits she made were crude, but they held their shape. She kept her sleeves rolled high to avoid the ache of fabric brushing her wrists. The skin there had begun to scab over. When Randolph returned, hair damp from creek water, he paused on the porch before stepping in. His eyes went to the table, now set with 2 tin plates and steaming biscuits. You didn't have to, he said. I wanted to, she answered, wiping her hands on her apron. I've done enough waiting in my life. He sat, nodding once in quiet approval. She poured him coffee from the kettle and settled across from him. He took a bite and chewed slow. You cook like a woman who's fed more mouths than her own. She looked down at her plate. My cousin's children. After the war, there were too many with no one left. I took work where I could. Housekeeping mostly. Sewing when I could get it. You don't talk like a woman who's been idle. I don't believe in idleness, she said. It invites sorrow. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. You plan on keeping busy here? I do, she said, but I'll need cloth, and needles finer than what you've got in that old drawer. I'll ride to Lander on Saturday. Make a list. She nodded, then hesitated. Randolph. He met her eyes. I'd like a porch garden, not just food. Something that blooms. He didn't smile, but there was something in his face that softened. "We'll plant it come first thaw." After breakfast, she washed the plates while he repaired the fence that ran along the south side of the property. By mid-morning, she stepped out with a jug of water and found him crouched near a post, hammer in hand, shirt clinging to his back with sweat. She held out the jug. "You missed a loose rail 2 stretches back." He accepted the water without comment, drank deep, then wiped his mouth. "You've got a sharp eye." "I had to. Back home, if something broke, it stayed broke unless I fixed it." He leaned against the post. "Tell me something you've never told anyone." She blinked once. "Why?" "Because I married you. And I want to know the parts of you no one else has." She considered him a long moment, then sat on the grass, arms around her knees. "When I was 17, I stole a pair of boots from a peddler who'd cheated me on thread. I returned them the next day, left them by his wagon, but I still think about it." "What did the boots look like?" "Black with brass buttons. Too fine for me." Randolph crouched beside her. "You still think it matters?" "It does to me." He leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "I rode with men who never returned what they took. You did. That counts." She looked down at his hands, rough and steady. "Your turn." He hesitated. "I once left a man bleeding in Montana. He'd stolen a horse, and I was the one who caught him. I had the choice to help or ride on. I rode on." "Do you regret it?" "Every time I see a man limping." She reached over and placed her hand lightly on his forearm. "Then you haven't forgotten. That counts." They sat there as the wind stirred the grass and the sky stretched wide above them, endless and blue. By late afternoon, they worked side by side clearing rocks from the far field. She wore his old gloves, too large for her fingers, and tripped once over a root. He caught her by the waist and steadied her, their bodies close for a breath longer than necessary. "You all right?" he asked, voice low. She looked up at him, hair clinging to her cheek from the heat. "I'm not breakable." "I know," he said, "but I still don't like seeing you fall." She didn't pull away until he let go. That night, after supper, she sat on the porch steps sewing a patch into one of his shirts. Randolph smoked his pipe nearby, watching the horizon fade into dusk. "You ever think about leaving Wyoming?" she asked, not looking up. "No," he said. "I've known too much running. This land holds steady." She pulled the thread taut. "Steady sounds good. You plan on staying?" "I married you," she said. He nodded once. "Then I reckon we're both done running." She tied off the thread and folded the shirt in her lap. "Tomorrow I'll scrub the floor. You've tracked in half the hillside." He chuckled softly. "Tomorrow I'll haul water. Fair trade." She looked over at him, the last light catching the curve of her cheek. "We'll build something, won't we?" He met her gaze. "We already are." She didn't answer, just reached out and took his hand. The sky turned deep blue, and the stars blinked into view, one by one. Neither of them let go. By the 5th day, spring had settled into the valley for good. Snow still clung to the north faces of the hills, but the ground near the cabin had softened, and green shoots pressed through the thawed soil. Randolph was mending the gate when Clementine appeared behind him with a strip of linen in one hand and a question in her eyes. "Do you know where I might find willow bark?" she asked, glancing toward the creek. He set the hammer down and brushed sawdust from his trousers. "There's a stand near the bend past the cottonwoods. You looking to make something?" She nodded, tucking the cloth into her apron pocket. "For pain. I learned from an old woman back home. She used it for fevers and aches. Figured I could keep a few bundles dried in the loft." Randolph picked up the axe handle and slung it over his shoulder. "I'll walk you there." She raised a brow. "You think I can't find it on my own?" He shook his head once. I think it's easier to carry a bundle when there's two hands on it. They followed the trail in silence, boots leaving soft impressions in the damp earth. The creek had swelled with meltwater, running full and cold. Clementine crouched near a young sapling and began to strip thin curls of bark from a low branch, careful not to cut too deep. Randolph stood nearby, watching her hands move with practiced precision. You always had healing in you? She kept her eyes on the branch. I suppose I had to. Folks didn't come looking for doctors where I lived. They came to whoever still had breath and steady hands. You miss Georgia? No, she said, not hesitating. I miss my mother's voice. I miss the smell of rain through pine. But I don't miss what was done there. He crouched beside her. You ever think about what comes next? She looked at him then, eyes steady. I think about building something that doesn't vanish when the wind changes. He nodded. You ever think about children? Her fingers stilled. I did. A long time ago. Before I was old enough to know what it might cost. Randolph didn't speak for a moment. Then he said, if that's something you still want, we'll face it together. I don't know yet, she said. But I like that you said we. They bundled the bark into the cloth, tied it tight, and began the walk home. The sun had risen to its highest point, casting long shadows behind them. At the cabin, Clementine hung the bark from a nail near the stove, where the air stayed warm and dry. Later that evening, as the light softened across the land, she brought out the tin box she'd kept tucked in her trunk since arriving. She laid it on the table and opened the lid. Inside were scraps of letter paper, some torn, others folded small, all written in her hand. She didn't offer them to Randolph. She only said, these were the ones I wrote before him, before Thorne. I never sent them. He looked at the box, then at her. What did you write about? Hope, she said, and fear. Mostly I was trying to decide which one was louder. Randolph pulled out a chair. You want to burn them? Clementine hesitated. No, I want to keep them. Not because they were right, but because they remind me how far I've come. He nodded, leaned back, and watched the firelight flicker across her face. She turned toward him, voice quiet. I've never known a man who didn't take more than he gave. Randolph didn't look away. Then I'll be the first. She studied him for a long breath. You already are. That night, as wind moved through the trees and the stars blinked to life, Clementine reached for him with the kind of trust that can't be spoken, only earned. They lay beside each other, not rushed, not afraid, hearts beating steady in the hush between words. And when morning came, it found them still there, wrapped in the quiet certainty of something new, something chosen. The scent of newly turned earth lingered on Clementine's hands as she stood barefoot in the patch of soil by the well. The garden rows were rough yet promising, marked with twigs and twine, each mound holding the beginnings of something she had planted with care. Randolph had brought her seeds wrapped in brown paper from lander chamomile, white sage, string beans, and a few sunflower kernels he said reminded him of her posture when she was determined. She wiped her palms on her skirt, watching him through the open cabin door. He was sharpening the plow blade, shoulders steady over the whetstone. His shirt hung from a nail under the eaves, and sweat slicked the line down his spine. She leaned her hip against the porch post and called out, You ever think about carving something? He looked up. Like what? Handles, ladles. A table leg if it pleased you. I saw what you did with that beam behind the stove. Your hands know how to shape things. He set the blade down and stood, brushing grit off his palms. Never gave it much thought. You should, she said. I'd like to sit at a table you made. He stepped up onto the porch, close enough that she could see the pale line of an old scar above his collarbone. You want a table? "I want a place we can sit with more than our elbows touching," she said, "and room enough for whatever might come." He touched her chin with his knuckles, just once. "Then I'll build you one." That afternoon, she found the box of her mother's thread tucked in her trunk, the spools wrapped in faded paper. She set up her sewing at the window, stitching lengths of muslin into curtains. Outside, Randolph sawed cedar boards with a rhythm that matched the wind rustling through the grass. The cabin began to change, not through grand things, but in the way it started to feel inhabited. Pine shavings on the floor, quiet humming from Clementine as she sewed, the smell of boiled rosemary hanging in the air from when she steeped it into their washwater. 2 days later, as Randolph worked on the table frame beneath the trees, Clementine rode into town with Miriam Mallory, the preacher's wife. Miriam needed sugar and a new kettle, and had offered to bring Clementine along for cloth and a proper broom. The ride was long, but quiet between them, broken only by the creak of the cart wheels and the occasional bird call. Inside the mercantile, Clementine kept her head high. She didn't flinch when the clerk gave her wrists a second look. She picked out calico in earth tones, a tin of buttons, and a spool of green thread. She passed on the lace. She didn't need softness for its own sake anymore. On the ride back, Miriam spoke first. "He watches you like a man who's found something he didn't believe existed." Clementine folded her hands in her lap. "He doesn't expect me to be someone I'm not." "That's rare," Miriam said. "Most men want history scrubbed clean. I wouldn't know how to do that if I tried." "You don't need to," Miriam said. "The way he looks at you, I'd say he likes the marks." That evening, Randolph met her at the gate, lifting the basket from her arms without a word. She followed him into the cabin and saw it immediately: the table. Cedar, square, with notched legs and a small carved sun along the edge. He'd smoothed the corners, left the grain visible. It smelled like sawdust and promise. She ran her fingertips along one edge. "You remembered." He leaned against the wall, arms crossed loosely. "It's not much. It's everything," she said. They sat at it that night, eating potatoes and eggs, the candle between them flickering against the windowpane. She reached across the table and brushed a crumb from his cheek. His voice was low. "You know you've changed this place." She met his eyes. "You gave me the space to." He stood and reached for her hand. She rose with him, and they swayed there in the soft light. No music, no purpose but the nearness. His hand at her back, hers at his shoulder. He kissed her once, slow and certain, and she pressed her forehead to his chest, breathing him in. They made love that night with the windows open. The wind moved through the new curtains, and the floorboards creaked beneath their weight. Nothing was rushed. Every touch felt earned. In the weeks that followed, the land greened. The garden sprouted. The table bore meals, mended clothes, and letters written to Rosalind, Randolph's sister, who sent back a parcel with cloth dolls and a note promising to visit come autumn. Clementine hung a strip of muslin above the bed, embroidered with a single line, "Let what's planted root deep." By midsummer, Clementine's hands had healed. The scars remained, thin and pale, but she no longer hid them. Randolph never touched them without looking her in the eye first. When he did, she let him. One morning, she woke with a strange calm in her chest. She stepped outside as the sun crested the ridge and laid a hand low on her belly. It was too soon for certainty, but her body felt different, fuller, steadier. She didn't rush to tell him. Instead, she cooked breakfast and watched him eat, her heart full of quiet knowing. When she finally took his hand and placed it against her stomach, he stilled. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded. "As I can be." He didn't speak for a long moment. Then he kissed her palm and said, "We'll make room, however much is needed." They built a cradle together beneath the cottonwoods. He carved the legs. She stitched the blanket. They didn't speak of fear, only of names, of stories they'd tell, of the life they were shaping from all that had come before. Years later, when neighbors passed through, they'd remark on the garden, the smooth cedar table, the way the curtains danced in the breeze. But what lingered most was the sense that the place had been made with care, that every board and stitch and seed had been chosen with love. Inside that cabin, on land that held their footprints and their laughter, Clementine and Randolph lived out the slow, good years. They raised 2 sons and a daughter, taught them to read the wind, to speak with kindness, and to always leave the door open for someone in need. And when the days grew long and quiet again, they still sat across from each other at that same table, fingers laced, hearts full, with nothing left to prove. Only love, steady as the land beneath them.